The previous chapter ended with the work of Saul and Barnabas in Antioch and their trip to Judea to deliver the aid to help the needy Christians in that area. The next chapter after this one is going to start chronicling the preaching trips that Saul, later known as Paul, would make. However, before getting to that, Luke records another incident with Peter in this chapter and what happened during the persecution that was inflicted by Herod. Earlier we studied about Stephen, the first Christian martyr, back in Acts chapter 7. This chapter tells us of the first one of the apostles to be killed for his faith. So let's start reading in verse 1 of chapter 12. Now about that time, Herod the king laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them. And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. When he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. When he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out before the people. So Peter was kept in the prison, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church of God. So chapter 12 begins with Herod having some who belonged to the church arrested. We're not told exactly what his motivation was. However, we do know that when he realized that it pleased the Jews, he continued in this effort. So among the members of the church who were arrested was James, the brother of John. He was an apostle, and Herod had James put to death with a sword. It almost appears that all of this happened quickly and surely came to a shock to the early church. Now, Stephen was killed and his death was tragic, but James was an apostle, and there were only so many of them. And to make matters worse, Peter was arrested after James' death, suggesting that Herod planned to kill him next. However, since he was doing this because it pleased the Jews, as it says in verse 3, he did not want to do anything to offend them unnecessarily. So since this was during the days of unleavened bread, he arrested Peter and held him in prison, planning after the Passover to bring him out before the people. The church used this extra time to pray for Peter while he waited in prison. Then we continue in verse 6. On the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, "Get up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands. And the angel said to him, "Gird yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." And he went out and continued to follow, and he did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they had passed the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate that leads into the city, which opened for them by itself. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. When Peter came to himself, he said, "Now I know for sure that the Lord has sent forth his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod, and from all that the Jewish people were expecting." And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who is also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. When he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in front of the gate. They said to her, "You are out of your mind," but she kept insisting that it was so. They kept saying, "It is his angel." But Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the door, they saw him and were amazed. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had led him out of the prison. And he said, "Report these things to James and the brethren." Then he left and went to another place. Now when day came, there was no small disturbance among the soldiers as to what could have become of Peter. When Herod had searched for him and had not found him, he examined the guards and ordered that they be led away to execution. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and was spending time there. So going back to the start of that section of verses, we see that the night before Herod was going to bring Peter out before the people, the apostle was being securely guarded with soldiers beside him and in front of the door. While he slept, an angel woke him and told him to get up and his chains fell off his hands. The angel then instructed Peter to get ready and to follow him out of the prison. And at this point, Peter thought that he was seeing a vision. He did not know that this was real, which was understandable after the vision that he saw before he received the invitation to go to the house of Cornelius. But at this point, he did not yet know that this was really happening to him. So as the angel led Peter out of the prison, they passed the guards, went to the iron gate that opened by itself for them, and they went out into the street. At that point, the angel departed from him, and Peter realized that the Lord had sent the angel to rescue him. So upon realizing this, he went to the house of Mary, who is described as the mother of John, who is also called Mark. John Mark will have a role to play in the travels of Saul, also known as Paul, and Barnabas in the following chapters. But there were many gathered together here at Mary's house and were praying. Whether or not Peter knew a group of disciples would be gathered there at this time, the text doesn't tell us. However, we see that Mary was one who opened up her home to her brethren, and that Peter knew he would be welcomed and safe there. Now when Peter came to the door, a servant girl named Rhoda answered. She recognized Peter's voice and ran to announce his arrival to the others. However, in her excitement, she failed to open the door for him, so he was still standing outside when she went to go tell the others that he was there. But the other disciples did not believe her and said that she was out of her mind and that this was only his angel, referring to the popular belief at the time of guardian angels that could be sent to aid the people of God. But when Peter kept knocking at the door, they finally opened, saw him, and were amazed to see him standing there. But Peter told them to be silent. He explained to them what happened and told them to report these things to James and the brethren. Obviously, this was not the same James who was killed earlier. Instead, this was likely the James who played a leading role in the church in Jerusalem in the following chapters. He's mentioned in Acts chapter 15 and also in Acts chapter 21. It is likely that James that he's referring to. But Peter did not stay with the brethren here at that time. Instead, he left and went on to another place. So the following day, Luke records that there was no small disturbance among the soldiers regarding what might have happened to Peter. Without knowing that an angel miraculously delivered him, the soldiers surely assumed that the guards who were watching him either abandoned their post or maybe even helped him to escape. Herod, when he examined all this, had the guards executed because of Peter's escape. So then Herod traveled down to Caesarea. So we continue reading in verse 20. Now he was very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and with one accord they came to him. And having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they were asking for peace, because their country was fed by the king's country. On an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering an address to them. The people kept crying out, "The voice of a God and not of a man." And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him, because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. Not only was Herod upset with the soldiers over Peter's escape from prison, but he was also angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, though we are not told in the text the reason for this. However, the people of Tyre and Sidon needed to win the favor of Herod. Their livelihood depended on it, as Luke said that their country was fed by the king's country. So they won the favor of the king's chamberlain and were asking for peace. So on a certain day when Herod appeared before the people, they began praising him for his speech. And the people kept crying out, "The voice of a God and not of a man." Just knowing what we read about Herod in this chapter, it's easy to see how this would fuel his ego. Yet this king, who thought he was so powerful that he could mistreat and kill Christians without consequences, he forgot that he was accountable to God. So here an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory. And the text says that he was eaten by worms and died. This would have been a miserable, painful, agonizing end to this ruler who forgot his place before God. Then the chapter concludes with these words, "But the word of the Lord continued to grow and to be multiplied. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their mission, taking along with them John, who was also called Mark." So this chapter began with Herod persecuting the church and even killing the Apostle James. However, at the end of the chapter, Herod was dead, and the gospel continued to grow and be multiplied. Meanwhile, Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem back to Antioch after they had completed their mission in delivering relief to the needy saints, as was described in chapter 11, verses 29 and 30. But when they returned to Antioch, it says they brought John Mark with them. Then the next chapter will pick up with the work of these men as they began traveling to proclaim the gospel.